Step out of the truck, ma'am, unless you've got something to hide. The flashlight beam cut across Naomi Carter's face hard enough to make her squint. Rain hammered the side of the 18-wheeler in steady waves, turning the empty stretch of Interstate 40 into a river of reflected red and blue lights. Diesel fumes drifted through the cold Tennessee air while tires hissed across wet pavement somewhere beyond the darkness. Naomi kept both hands on the steering wheel, calm, still, watching. Officer Daniel Mercer stood below her cab with one hand resting near his belt, and the other gripping the flashlight like he was already convinced he'd caught someone dangerous. Two younger deputies lingered behind him near the patrol cruiser, their laughter low and careless beneath the crackle of police radio chatter. "You deaf or just stubborn?" Mercer asked. Naomi finally looked down at him through the rain-streaked window. "I heard you." Her voice was smooth, controlled, almost tired. That bothered Mercer more than fear would have. Most people got nervous during midnight traffic stops. Especially out here. Especially alone. But Naomi Carter didn't look nervous at all. The engine idled beneath her boots with a deep mechanical growl. Mercer narrowed his eyes at the sight of her. Black woman. Long-haul trucker. Mississippi plates. Driving alone after midnight through a county already on edge because of a trafficking investigation flooding local news stations. In Mercer's mind, the picture had already formed itself before she even opened the door. "License and registration," he said sharply. Naomi reached slowly into the overhead compartment and handed down the paperwork without argument. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the cab onto Mercer's sleeve as he scanned the documents with a skeptical look. "Naomi Carter," he muttered. "Owner-operator." One deputy glanced toward the truck and smirked. "Didn't expect a woman driving this monster." The other laughed quietly. "Yeah, especially not her." Naomi heard it. Her expression never changed. Mercer circled the truck slowly while his flashlight swept across the massive trailer. White paint. No company logo. Fresh mud along the wheels. The kind of setup that made small-town cops suspicious. The rain intensified, drumming against metal so loudly it nearly drowned out the distant thunder rolling across the hills. "Where you headed?" Mercer called out. "Knoxville." "What's in the trailer?" "Furniture." Mercer stopped walking. "Mind opening it?" Naomi's eyes rested on him for one long second. Not angry. Not defensive. Measuring. "Do I have a choice?" Mercer smiled slightly. "Not warm. Depends how difficult you want to make tonight." One of the deputies raised his phone casually, pretending to check a text while the camera pointed straight toward Naomi's cab. Another flash of lightning lit up the highway for half a second, revealing the tired lines beneath Naomi's eyes and the faint scar near her jawline before darkness swallowed everything again. She climbed down from the truck slowly, boots splashing into shallow rainwater. Even standing in the storm beneath flashing lights, she carried herself with quiet control, shoulders straight, breathing steady. Mercer noticed it immediately. No trembling hands. No frantic explanations. No panique. That calm started crawling under his skin. "You carrying weapons?" he asked. "No drugs? No human cargo?" The question hung in the rain between them. Naomi's gaze sharpened almost invisibly. Just for a second. Then it vanished. No. Mercer stepped closer. Close enough to smell rainwater, coffee, and diesel on her jacket. "Funny thing is," he said quietly, "people always say no right before I find something." Naomi looked past him toward the patrol cruiser, toward the deputy still filming, toward the empty black highway stretching endlessly behind them. Then she asked one soft question that made Mercer's smile fade just a little. "Did anyone call this stop in?" Rainwater rolled down Officer Mercer's jaw as he stared at Naomi through the flashing lights. For the first time since pulling her over, the confidence in his posture shifted slightly. "What kind of question is that?" he asked. Naomi folded her arms against the cold wind. "A simple one." Mercer looked toward the deputies near the cruiser. One of them lowered his phone immediately. The other pretended to adjust the radio clip to his vest. The highway suddenly felt quieter despite the storm. Naomi watched every movement without appearing to. That was what unsettled Mercer most. She noticed things too quickly. "You expecting somebody?" he asked carefully. Naomi glanced toward the dark tree line beyond the shoulder of the interstate. Depends who already knows I am here. Mercer gave a dry laugh. You think you are important enough for somebody to track a traffic stop? I think small towns talk, Naomi replied. Especially when state police start circling trucks after midnight. A long silence followed. Mercer hated silence during stops. Silence gave people control. He motioned toward the rear trailer doors. Open it. Naomi reached into her jacket pocket and handed him a ring of keys without argument. No hesitación. No excuses. Mercer walked toward the trailer while the deputies followed behind him through puddles reflecting red and blue light like broken glass. The heavy lock clicked open. Metal hinges groaned as the trailer doors swung wide into the storm. Inside sat rows of wrapped furniture secured with cargo straps. Couches. Dining tables. Mattresses sealed in thick plastic. Clean. Organized. Empty. One deputy frowned. Looks normal. Mercer climbed partially inside anyway, sweeping his flashlight across every corner. Water dripped from his sleeves onto the steel floor. Naomi remained near the cab with her hands visible, unmoving beneath the flashing patrol lights. Then Mercer's beam stopped. Near the front wall of the trailer sat a small cardboard box wedged behind a stack of furniture pads. Unmarked. Out of place. Mercer pulled it forward slowly. One deputy stepped closer. What is it? Mercer opened the top flap carefully. Inside were several prepaid cell phones sealed in plastic, a road atlas covered in handwritten markings, and a bundle of zip ties. The younger deputy let out a low whistle. Well, damn. Mercer looked back toward Naomi. The storm flashed white behind her silhouette for half a second. Still calm. Too calm. You want to explain this? He called out. Naomi did not answer immediately. Her eyes locked onto the box for only a fraction of a second before returning to Mercer's face. No, she said quietly. Mercer stepped down from the trailer holding one of the burner phones between two fingers. Most truckers carry snacks. You carry disposable phones and restraints. Naomi's expression remained unreadable. You already decided what story you want, she said. So tell it. Mercer moved closer again, boots splashing through standing rainwater. Maybe you are moving girls across state lines. Maybe drugs. Maybe worse. One deputy muttered under his breath. Cartel mule. Naomi ignored him. Mercer held up the atlas. Red circles covered several highways stretching through Tennessee, Arkansas, and northern Mississippi. Tiny handwritten notes filled the margins beside truck stops and abandoned way stations. Mercer flipped through the pages slowly while rain soaked the edges. Looks like trafficking routes to me. Naomi's jaw tightened almost invisibly. You should be careful making assumptions. You should be careful carrying evidence, Mercer snapped back. Thunder rolled low overhead. The deputy with the phone quietly started recording again. Naomi noticed the reflection of the screen in the cruiser window. Then something changed in her face. Not fear. Not anger. Disappointment. Small. Barely visible. But real. Mercer saw it and mistook it for weakness. Put your hands behind your back, he ordered. Naomi looked directly into his eyes while cold rain streamed down both their faces. Officer, she said softly. If you do this now, you are going to regret the next 10 minutes of your life. For a second, nobody moved. Rain pounded against the side of the trailer while red and blue lights pulsed across the wet asphalt like a heartbeat. Officer Mercer stared at Naomi Carter, searching her face for panic, arrogance, anything he could use to reassure himself he still controlled the situation. But Naomi only stood there beneath the storm with her hands relaxed at her sides and water dripping from the edge of her dark jacket. She looked less like a suspect and more like someone waiting for a clock to run out. Mercer stepped forward anyway. Hands behind your back, he repeated. Naomi exhaled. Slowly through her nose. You still have time to rethink this. One deputy snorted quietly. She talks like she is in a movie. Mercer reached for the cuffs clipped to his belt. No, he said coldly. She talks like somebody who forgot where she is. Naomi slowly placed her hands behind her back without resistance. The metal clicked around her wrists. Cold. Tight. Final. Yet even then she did not argue. That silence settled over the roadside heavier than the rain itself. Mercer guided her toward the cruiser while headlights from passing semis streaked through the darkness beyond the shoulder. The deputy with the phone kept recording until Mercer shot him a sharp look. "Turn that thing off." The deputy lowered it reluctantly. Naomi ducked into the back seat without needing instruction. Water dripped from her braids onto the vinyl seats as the cruiser door shut with a hollow metallic thud. Inside, the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and wet fabric. Mercer climbed into the front passenger seat while another deputy drove. The heater rattled loudly, struggling against the cold night air leaking through the doors. Naomi sat behind the metal divider perfectly still, staring through the windshield at the endless highway ahead. "You know what I think?" Mercer said after several miles of silence. Naomi did not answer. "I think you got caught doing something ugly, and now you are trying to act smarter than everybody else." Lightning flashed beyond the trees. Naomi's reflection flickered faintly against the side window. "Do you always decide who people are this quickly?" she asked softly. Mercer leaned back in his seat. "Usually I do not need this long." The deputy driving laughed under his breath. Naomi's eyes shifted briefly toward the dashboard clock glowing 1:17 a.m., then toward the radio, then toward the rearview mirror. Calculating. Watching. Mercer noticed it again. The way she scanned everything. Like she was memorizing the room before entering it. "Those phones," he continued. "Those maps. The zip ties. You expect me to believe that is innocent." Naomi looked out at the rain sliding down the glass. "I expect you to believe whatever helps you sleep." Mercer's jaw tightened. The cruiser rolled off the interstate and onto a narrow county road lined with dark pine trees bending in the wind. 20 minutes later, the sheriff's department appeared through the rain, a squat brick building glowing beneath harsh fluorescent floodlights. Naomi stepped out of the cruiser calmly as deputies escorted her inside. The station smelled like burnt coffee, old paper and floor cleaner. Somewhere down the hall, a television played muted weather alerts while an ancient vending machine buzzed beside the waiting area. Sheriff Tom Grady emerged from an office adjusting his glasses, his silver hair flattened on one side from exhaustion. "What have we got?" Mercer held up the evidence box proudly. "Possible trafficking suspect." Grady glanced toward Naomi. His eyes lingered there a moment longer than Mercer expected. Naomi met the sheriff's gaze without speaking. Something unreadable passed across Grady's tired face before he motioned toward the interrogation room. "Put her inside." Mercer opened the steel door and Naomi walked in quietly. The room was small. Gray walls. Metal table. One flickering fluorescent light overhead humming softly like an insect trapped behind glass. Naomi sat down slowly, cuffs still around her wrists. Then she looked directly at Mercer one more time and asked the question that finally made the first crack appear in his confidence. "Officer," she said calmly, "did your department report this arrest to the state database yet?" The question lingered in the interrogation room long after Naomi stopped speaking. Officer Mercer stood near the steel door with his arms crossed, staring at her beneath the cold fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Sheriff Grady remained silent beside him, one hand resting against his belt while rain tapped softly against the narrow window high on the wall. "Why would that matter to you?" Mercer finally asked. Naomi leaned back slightly in the metal chair, the cuffs glinting beneath the pale light. "Because if you entered my name already, somebody knows I am here." Mercer laughed once under his breath, but it sounded thinner now. "You keep saying that like you are important." Naomi tilted her head. "Slightly. Maybe I am." Silence settled over the room again. The old ventilation system rattled faintly above them. Somewhere down the hall, a deputy dropped a stack of paperwork and cursed under his breath. Normal sounds. Small sounds. Yet Mercer suddenly felt strangely aware of all of them. Sheriff Grady stepped closer to the table and opened the evidence folder slowly. The prepaid phones rested beside the marked road atlas, and the bundle of zip ties sealed in clear plastic bags. "Those routes," Grady said calmly. "You got a reason for marking truck stops across 3 states?" Naomi looked at the map but did not answer immediately. Her face softened for the first time that night. Barely noticeable. Like a memory had slipped through before she pushed it back down again. "Missing girls disappear near those exits," she said quietly. Mercer frowned. "Convenient story." Naomi ignored him. "Most are runaways. Foster kids. Some are undocumented. Nobody notices until weeks later." Grady's expression changed almost invisibly. Mercer noticed it. "Sheriff," he said quickly. "She could have copied that from the news." Naomi looked directly at Mercer. "You think traffickers move through airports wearing signs?" The room fell still. Rainwater slid slowly down the small glass window behind her. Mercer pulled out the chair across from Naomi and sat down hard enough for the metal legs to scrape the floor. "You expect us to believe you are some kind of hero trucker tracking kidnappers?" Naomi's eyes stayed steady on his. "I expect nothing from you." That answer irritated him more than anger would have. Mercer opened one of the burner phones and pressed the power button. Dead battery. He grabbed another. Same thing. Why carry 6 phones? Naomi watched him carefully. Because people disappear when they use the same number too long. Mercer scoffed. That sounds criminal as hell. Naomi's voice remained calm. Sometimes surviving does. Sheriff Grady slowly flipped through the atlas again. One folded photograph slipped from between the pages and landed softly on the table. A little girl around 10 years old smiled into the camera holding a stuffed rabbit beneath bright summer sunlight. Mercer picked it up automatically. The back of the photo contained a handwritten date from 6 years earlier. Naomi's eyes lowered briefly toward the picture. The first real crack in her calm appeared there. Tiny. Human. "Who is she?" Grady asked softly. Naomi stared at the table for a moment before answering. "My sister." Mercer glanced between the photo and Naomi. "She missing?" Naomi swallowed once. She was. The room seemed colder after that. Even Mercer felt it. Grady leaned back slowly in his chair while fluorescent light reflected off the lenses of his glasses. "You are saying all this because of your sister?" Naomi nodded faintly. "I learned early what happens when nobody listens to black girls who say something is wrong." Mercer shifted uncomfortably. Naomi continued staring at the photo in his hand. "By the time anybody cared," she said quietly, "she was already gone." No one spoke for several seconds. Then suddenly the radio clipped to Mercer's shoulder crackled loudly with static before a dispatcher's nervous voice broke through. "Sheriff Grady, you need to pick up line 1 immediately. It is state level. They said it cannot wait." Sheriff Grady stared at the radio for half a second before unclipping it from Mercer's shoulder. The dispatcher's voice crackled again through static. "Sheriff, they said it is urgent. State level clearance." Grady glanced toward Naomi instinctively. She sat perfectly still beneath the humming fluorescent light, wrists cuffed to the metal chair, eyes calm despite everything. Too calm. Mercer noticed it too. "Probably nothing," he muttered. "Could be about the interstate stop report." But Grady did not answer. He walked out of the interrogation room with slow measured steps, shutting the steel door behind him. The click echoed sharply in the small room. Mercer remained standing across from Naomi, while rain rattled faintly against the building outside. The sheriff's department always felt tired after midnight. Old coffee, buzzing lights, filing cabinets older than half the deputies working there. But now something heavier sat in the air. Mercer folded his arms. "You timed that pretty well." Naomi looked at him. Quietly. "I did not call anyone." "Funny coincidence then." "There are no coincidences after midnight, officer." That answer crawled under his skin again. Mercer pulled the photograph of the little girl from the table and studied it more closely. Bright smile. Front tooth missing. Summer sunlight frozen forever in glossy paper. He hated that the image made Naomi seem human instead of suspicious. "Your sister," he said finally. Naomi nodded once. "Tasha." Mercer leaned against the wall beneath the flickering light. "You never said what happened to her." Naomi stared toward the mirrored glass on the far wall. "Because it does not change anything." "Maybe it does." For the first time all night, Naomi hesitated before speaking. "She disappeared outside a truck stop in Arkansas." Mercer remained silent. Naomi's voice softened slightly, though her expression barely moved. "My mother worked double shifts at a diner. I used to watch Tasha after school. One afternoon she walked across the parking lot to buy candy from a vending machine and never came back." The humming fluorescent light suddenly sounded louder. Mercer shifted his weight awkwardly. Naomi continued staring at the mirror. "Police told my mother she probably ran away." Her lips tightened faintly. "She was 11. Mercer looked down at the photograph again. Rainwater still clung to the corners from the roadside search. They never found her? Naomi slowly shook her head. Not alive. Silence swallowed the room. Somewhere down the hall, a copier machine whirred to life. Then stopped. Naomi finally looked back at Mercer. That is why I started driving routes. Mercer frowned slightly. To look for traffickers? To look where nobody else wanted to. Her voice stayed low and steady, but something inside it carried exhaustion older than the room itself. Mercer looked away first. He hated realizing his assumptions no longer fit neatly together. The phones, the maps, the truck. None of it looked innocent, but Naomi did not look like the criminals he expected either. She looked like somebody carrying grief for too many years. The steel door suddenly opened again. Sheriff Grady stepped inside quickly, but something about him had changed. His face had lost color. He closed the door harder than intended and stared directly at Naomi. Mercer straightened immediately. What happened? Grady ignored him at first. His breathing sounded uneven beneath the soft hum of the overhead light. Then he looked toward the evidence table, toward the burner phones, toward the marked atlas, finally back to Naomi herself. Who exactly are you? He asked quietly. Naomi met his eyes without blinking. You already know the answer to that. Mercer frowned. Sheriff. Grady slowly removed his glasses and rubbed a trembling hand across his mouth. State Bureau called. The room fell completely still. Even Mercer's breathing seemed louder now. Grady swallowed hard before continuing. They said if Naomi Carter was brought into custody tonight, we were to notify federal authorities immediately and under no circumstances interfere with her investigation. Mercer stared at him. Investigation? Grady nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on Naomi. And they said if we failed to report contact with her within 1 hour. His voice trailed off briefly. Internal Affairs would be arriving before sunrise. Officer Mercer stared at Sheriff Grady as if he had misheard him. The fluorescent light above the interrogation table flickered once, buzzing softly in the silence that followed. Naomi Carter remained seated in the metal chair with her cuffed hands resting calmly in her lap, rainwater still darkening the shoulders of her jacket. She did not smile. She did not look triumphant. Somehow that made everything worse. Federal authorities? Mercer repeated quietly. Grady nodded once. The State Bureau flagged her name the second we entered it. Mercer looked toward Naomi again, trying to reconcile the woman sitting in front of him with the image he had built during the traffic stop. Black female trucker. Burner phones. Secret maps. Suspicious cargo. It had all felt obvious an hour ago. Now every decision replayed in his head with a different weight attached to it. Naomi finally spoke. I told you somebody would know where I was. Mercer's jaw tightened. You could have said who you were. No, Naomi replied calmly. I could not. Sheriff Grady stepped toward the table slowly. Are you federal? Naomi looked directly at him. Not officially. That answer only deepened the tension in the room. Grady rubbed a hand across his tired face. Then what exactly is going on here? Naomi glanced toward the mirrored glass before answering. An operation that has taken 3 years. Mercer folded his arms harder across his chest. And somehow that operation involves 6 burner phones and driving around with zip ties? Naomi's eyes shifted toward him. You arrested me before asking the right questions. Mercer opened his mouth to argue but stopped. Because she was right. The realization sat bitter in his throat. Naomi leaned back slightly in the chair while the old ventilation system rattled overhead. Traffickers switch communication lines constantly. They move victims through freight corridors because truck routes attract less attention than airports. Her voice remained low and controlled, almost clinical now. Most victims cross 3 state lines before anyone files a report. Grady slowly looked toward the marked atlas on the evidence table. Those circles. Pickup zones, Naomi said quietly. Drop points. Recruitment areas near shelters and bus stations. Mercer frowned. How do you know all that? Naomi held his gaze for a long second. Because I spent years pretending to belong around the people responsible. That sentence settled heavily inside the small interrogation room. Rain tapped against the high window while somewhere outside thunder rolled farther into the distance. Grady pulled out a chair and sat down slowly across from her. The State Bureau said internal affairs may already be on the way. Naomi nodded faintly. Probably. Mercer looked sharply toward her. You planned this? No. Naomi's expression hardened slightly for the first time all night. I planned for corruption. There is a difference. The room went still again. Mercer suddenly became aware of the body camera resting on the desk outside. The roadside search. The deputy recording with his phone. The jokes. The assumptions. Every moment now felt exposed under some invisible spotlight he had not known existed. Naomi watched the realization creep across his face. You think this was about embarrassing you, she said softly. It never was. Grady leaned forward. Then what was it about? Naomi lowered her eyes briefly toward the photograph of her sister still lying beside the atlas. Her voice softened when she answered. Finding which departments leak information to traffickers after traffic stops. Mercer's stomach tightened. Grady froze completely. Naomi continued carefully. Every time certain drivers get pulled over carrying hidden victims, somebody warns the network before state investigators arrive. The fluorescent light hummed above them while rainwater slid slowly down the window glass. Mercer felt cold despite the overheated room. You think somebody here is leaking? He asked quietly. Naomi met his eyes. I think somebody knew I would be stopped tonight before your lights ever turned on. At that exact moment, the station lights flickered once. Then twice. Somewhere down the hallway, a deputy shouted in confusion as the front doors suddenly opened and the sound of heavy tires rolled into the parking lot outside. The station lights flickered again before settling into a weak yellow glow that made everyone inside look older and more exhausted. Sheriff Grady stood up immediately as voices echoed from the front lobby. Heavy doors opened. Wet boots crossed the tile floor. Naomi Carter remained seated beneath the fluorescent light with the same impossible calm that had followed her since the side of the interstate. Officer Mercer moved toward the interrogation room door instinctively, but Naomi's voice stopped him before he reached it. Do not touch your radio. Mercer turned sharply toward her. Why? Naomi's eyes lifted slowly toward the ceiling camera in the corner of the room. Because if somebody inside this building tipped them off, they are listening for panic. That sentence landed hard. Mercer suddenly became aware of every deputy outside. Every pair of eyes. Every voice in the hallway. Sheriff Grady stepped back into the room and shut the steel door behind him. His face looked pale beneath the harsh lighting. 3 black SUVs just pulled in, he said quietly. Mercer exhaled once in relief. Federal agents? Grady did not answer immediately. That silence said enough. Naomi's expression sharpened slightly for the first time all night. How many people came inside? She asked. 4. Uniforms. No. Naomi slowly stood up despite the cuffs still around her wrists. The metal chair scraped softly against the floor. That is not federal. Mercer frowned. How would you know? Naomi looked directly at him. Because my team does not arrive unannounced. The air inside the interrogation room suddenly felt thinner. Outside, muffled voices continued moving through the hallway. One deputy laughed nervously. Another voice Naomi did not recognize spoke low enough to avoid carrying through the walls. Sheriff Grady instinctively rested one hand near his sidearm before catching himself. Naomi noticed the movement immediately. Sheriff, she said quietly, if those men ask for me by name, do not confirm anything. Mercer stared at her. You think traffickers just walked into a police station? Naomi's eyes stayed fixed on the door. I think somebody realized their leak got interrupted. Thunder rolled faintly outside while rain streaked down the tiny interrogation room window. Mercer suddenly remembered the roadside stop differently now. The strange timing. Naomi asking if anyone had called the stop in. The way she had scanned every radio and mirror. She had not been afraid of the police. She had been afraid of who might hear the police. A hard knock struck the steel door. Everybody in the room froze. Sheriff Grady opened it halfway. Deputy Collins stood outside, breathing hard. Sheriff, those men are asking about a trucker brought in tonight. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly. Mercer felt something cold settle in his stomach. Who are they? Grady asked. Collins swallowed. They flashed federal badges, but what? Collins glanced nervously down the hallway before lowering his voice. Their credentials looked wrong. Silence crashed into the room. Naomi stepped closer despite the cuffs still binding her wrists. What did they say exactly? Collins looked at her uneasily. They asked if a black female driver, named Naomi Carter, was in custody. Mercer's pulse quickened. Naomi closed her eyes for half a second like she had been expecting this moment all along. Then she opened them again, calm returning instantly. "Officer Mercer," she said softly, "you wanted to know why I carry burner phones." Mercer stared at her. Naomi's voice remained steady. "Because people inside law enforcement have been selling route information for years. Drivers disappear after routine stops. Victims vanish before state units arrive." Grady slowly shut the interrogation room door completely now. The hallway noise became muffled again. "You think one of my deputies contacted them?" he asked quietly. Naomi did not answer directly. Instead, she looked toward the security camera blinking red above the door. "I think somebody already knows exactly where I am sitting." Mercer followed her gaze upward. For the first time that night, genuine fear slipped beneath his anger. Naomi noticed it immediately. "Now you understand," she whispered. "This was never a traffic stop. It was bait." The word hung in the interrogation room like smoke. Bait. Officer Mercer stared at Naomi Carter while rain battered the sheriff's station windows hard enough to rattle the old glass. Somewhere beyond the steel door, voices moved through the hallway with careful, measured footsteps. Not rushed. Not nervous. Confident. Naomi slowly turned toward Sheriff Grady. "How many deputies are on duty tonight?" Grady blinked once, still processing everything unraveling around him. "6. Who knew about my stop before you entered my name into the system?" Grady hesitated. That hesitation answered more than words could. Naomi nodded faintly. "Exactly." Mercer rubbed a hand across his face, exhaustion and frustration beginning to crack through his pride. "So what now?" Naomi looked directly at him. "Now we find out who is selling information." The fluorescent light buzzed overhead while thunder rolled low across the county outside. Grady stepped toward the camera mounted above the interrogation room door and unplugged the monitor feed from the wall. The tiny blinking red light died instantly. Naomi watched carefully. "Too late for secrecy now," she said softly. "If they are here, somebody already warned them." A sharp knock echoed down the hallway, followed by a voice calling out calmly, "Sheriff Grady? Federal Transport Detail." Mercer instinctively reached toward his belt again before catching himself. Naomi noticed the movement immediately. "Do not escalate this," she warned quietly. "Men who traffic children survive by making chaos look official." Grady opened the door slightly and motioned for Deputy Collins to step inside quickly. Collins looked pale beneath the station lights. "Sheriff," he whispered. "Those guys are asking why the surveillance cameras stopped working." Naomi's expression hardened. How would they know the cameras are off unless they already had access to the feed? Silence crashed over the room again. Mercer slowly turned toward Collins. Collins swallowed hard. "I did not tell them anything." Naomi believed him instantly. Mercer could see it in her face. "It is not him," she said quietly. Grady shut the door again and lowered his voice. "Then who?" Naomi looked toward Mercer. "Who arrived first at the traffic stop tonight besides you?" Mercer frowned, thinking back through the storm and flashing lights. "Deputy Ryan Keller." Naomi's eyes sharpened slightly. "Where is he now?" Mercer looked toward Collins. Collins shifted uneasily. "I have not seen him since the SUVs pulled in." The room suddenly felt much smaller. Rain slid down the high window in silver streaks beneath the flickering light. Naomi stepped closer to the table, cuffs still around her wrists. "Keller called somebody after the stop," she said. "I watched him walk behind the cruiser with his phone before he turned his body camera back on." Mercer remembered it instantly now. The brief disappearance near the roadside ditch. The phone screen lighting Keller's face blue in the rain. At the time it had felt meaningless. Now it sat in his memory like poison. "Why did you not say something earlier?" Mercer asked. Naomi held his gaze. "Because I needed to know who he would contact." Grady stared at her. "You let this happen?" Naomi's voice softened unexpectedly. "Sheriff girls disappear every week because..." Departments leak information before investigators can move. Her eyes lowered briefly toward the photograph of her sister still resting on the metal table. I could not stop that by playing safe. Another knock struck the hallway outside, louder this time. A different voice followed. Calm. Controlled. Sheriff, this is federal business. We need access to the detainee immediately. Mercer looked toward the door. Something about the tone made his stomach tighten. Not law enforcement. Performance. Naomi stepped closer to him now, close enough for him to notice the exhaustion hidden beneath her composure. Listen carefully, she whispered. If Keller is part of this, he is not the top. Mercer frowned. How do you know? Naomi looked toward the rain-covered window. Because men like Keller do not build networks. Her eyes slowly returned to his. They just open doors for monsters smarter than they are. At that exact moment, the station lights went completely dark. Darkness swallowed the sheriff's station so completely that for one disorienting second nobody moved. The soft hum of fluorescent lights vanished. The vending machine down the hallway went silent. Even the rain outside seemed louder now, pounding against the roof and windows like fists on metal. Officer Mercer heard somebody curse in the hallway. Then the emergency backup lights flickered on, bathing the station in a dim reddish glow that made every shadow look deeper. Naomi Carter did not flinch. Sheriff Grady reached instinctively for the flashlight clipped to his belt while Deputy Collins backed toward the wall near the interrogation room door. Outside in the hallway, heavy footsteps moved quickly across the tile floor. Too many. Too controlled. Naomi's voice cut through the darkness calmly. They are moving faster now because they think the cameras are dead. Mercer stared at her through the red emergency lighting. You sound like you expected this. Naomi met his eyes steadily. I hoped I was wrong. A loud banging suddenly echoed from the front lobby, followed by another voice shouting for access to the holding area. Sheriff Grady looked toward the steel door. Nobody opens anything, he said sharply. For the first time that night, his voice sounded less like a tired county sheriff and more like a man realizing his department might already be compromised. Mercer stepped toward the interrogation room window and peered through the narrow glass. Under the dim emergency lights, deputies moved nervously near the reception desk while three unfamiliar men in dark jackets stood near the front entrance holding up badges too quickly for anyone to examine properly. One of them spoke calmly to Deputy Miller while another scanned the station interior with cold, practiced eyes. Naomi watched Mercer carefully. The tall one with gray hair, she said quietly. Do not let him near the evidence table. Mercer turned sharply toward her. How do you know him? Naomi's expression darkened faintly. Because I spent 8 months trying to prove he exists. Thunder cracked outside hard enough to shake the building. The lights flickered again. Sheriff Grady stepped closer to Naomi now, suspicion and fear battling across his exhausted face. Who is he? Naomi lowered her voice. Name changes constantly. Most people in the network call him Bishop. Mercer frowned. That is not a real name. No, Naomi replied softly. Real names are dangerous in his business. Outside the room, another deputy shouted something Mercer could not fully hear before the sound of a radio crashing onto the floor echoed down the hallway. Nobody screamed. Nobody fought. Somehow that made it feel worse. Controlled chaos. Planned chaos. Naomi slowly held out her cuffed hands toward Mercer. You need to unlock these. Mercer hesitated immediately. Naomi stepped closer beneath the red emergency glow. Her voice still calm despite the tension tightening around all of them. Officer, if Bishop is here personally, then somebody inside this station gave him reason to panic. Grady's eyes narrowed. You think the leak is bigger than Keller? Naomi looked at him carefully. I think Keller was disposable. The room fell silent again except for the rain hammering outside. Mercer stared down at the handcuff key in his palm. Just hours ago he had treated Naomi like another suspicious driver passing through his county. Now, she stood in front of him like the only person in the building who understood what was happening. That realization stung worse than embarrassment. Naomi noticed the hesitation in his face. You still do not trust me, she said quietly. Mercer looked up at her. I pulled you over because I thought you were trafficking people. Naomi nodded once. I know. Her answer carried no anger. Somehow that hurt more. Before Mercer could respond, The station intercom crackled alive through static. A calm male voice filled the hallway outside. Smooth, polite, chillingly relaxed. "Sheriff Grady," the voice said. "We know the woman is inside. Nobody else needs to get hurt because of a misunderstanding." Naomi closed her eyes briefly the moment she heard the voice. Then she opened them again and whispered something that made Mercer's blood run cold. "That is him." The voice over the intercom faded into static, but the silence left behind felt even heavier. Officer Mercer stared at Naomi Carter beneath the dim red emergency lights while rain slammed against the sheriff's station roof hard enough to sound like distant applause. Sheriff Grady slowly removed the flashlight from his belt and placed it on the interrogation table beside the photograph of Naomi's sister. His hand trembled slightly. Naomi noticed. She noticed everything. "You know his voice?" Mercer asked quietly. Naomi nodded once. "I have heard recordings." "Never met him face to face?" Naomi looked toward the steel door. "Nobody survives that long if they do." Another knock echoed somewhere down the hallway. Calm, rhythmic, patient. Bishop was not behaving like a desperate criminal trying to escape. He sounded like a man arriving to collect property he believed already belonged to him. Mercer finally stepped forward and unlocked Naomi's cuffs. The metal clicked open softly in the red light. Naomi rubbed her wrists once but said nothing. Mercer hated how natural the movement felt now, like the roles between them had quietly reversed without either man fully noticing when it happened. Sheriff Grady looked toward Mercer. "Get Collins and Miller armed and keep everybody away from the holding area." Mercer nodded, automatically before stopping himself. What if some of them are involved? That question landed hard. Grady lowered his eyes briefly. The old sheriff suddenly looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. Naomi stepped toward the interrogation room mirror and studied her own reflection faintly glowing under the emergency lighting. "Corruption survives because decent people assume it cannot happen near them," she said quietly. Mercer watched her carefully. "How long have you been undercover?" Naomi remained silent for several seconds before answering. "Long enough to stop sleeping normally." Thunder rolled low outside. Somewhere near the front lobby, a deputy shouted again before his voice abruptly cut off. "Not pain. Not panic. Just silence." Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. "They are separating the station." Mercer frowned. "What does that mean?" Naomi turned toward him. "It means they do not want witnesses together." The room suddenly felt colder despite the broken heating system still rattling through the vents. Sheriff Grady reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. Static answered him. "Damn it." Naomi walked toward the evidence table and picked up the marked road atlas slowly. Her fingers traced several red circles near the Tennessee state line. "Bishop moves victims through freight routes hidden inside legal cargo shipments," she said quietly. "Furniture, produce, livestock, anything that keeps trucks moving through checkpoints without questions." Mercer stared at the map. "And tonight?" Naomi looked up at him. "Tonight he came because somebody warned him I was finally close enough to identify his distribution hubs." The words settled over the room like ash. Mercer suddenly understood something terrible. This was never just about corruption inside one sheriff department. This was bigger, organized, patient, built over years. Naomi noticed the realization crossing his face. "You thought I was the criminal because I look like somebody easy to blame," she said softly. Mercer looked away immediately. Shame burned hotter than anger now. He remembered the roadside jokes, the assumptions, the flashlight in her face. Naomi did not press him further. Somehow that made it worse. The station intercom crackled alive again. Bishop's voice returned smoother this time, almost conversational. "Sheriff Grady," he said calmly, "you still have time to avoid making this ugly. Release Miss Carter into our custody and everybody goes home safely tonight." Naomi's eyes darkened instantly. "He only says that when he is stalling." Mercer looked toward her. "For what?" Naomi listened carefully to the storm outside. Then her expression changed. Tiny, sharp, focused. "Another team." Sheriff Grady moved toward the hallway window and pulled the blinds apart slightly. Blue and red emergency lights suddenly reflected across his face from outside. "Not police cruisers. Black unmarked SUVs rolling silently through the rain. Naomi exhaled once under her breath. The first hint of relief Mercer had seen all night crossed her features. "That," she whispered, "is my team." Rain hammered the parking lot as the black SUVs rolled silently beneath the flashing emergency lights outside the sheriff's station. Their headlights cut through the storm in long white beams that reflected across the wet pavement like broken glass. Inside the interrogation room, Officer Mercer stared through the blinds while his pulse thudded against his ribs hard enough to make his jaw tighten. Naomi Carter stood beside the evidence table holding the marked atlas against her chest, her expression finally shifting from guarded tension to focused readiness. Sheriff Grady exhaled heavily beside the window. "You trust them?" he asked quietly. Naomi nodded once. "With my life." Before anyone could move, the station intercom crackled sharply again. Bishop's voice remained smooth and calm despite the storm outside. "Naomi," he said softly this time, "you should know better than anyone that federal teams do not arrive fast enough to save people." Naomi's eyes darkened instantly. Mercer noticed it. That voice reached somewhere deep beneath her composure. "Do not answer him," Grady warned. Naomi ignored the intercom completely. Instead she turned toward Mercer. "Where is Deputy Keller assigned tonight?" Mercer blinked once. "Motor pool detail." Naomi shook her head immediately. "No. That was his cover assignment." She stepped toward the interrogation room door. "He is near the evidence locker." Mercer frowned. "How could you possibly know that?" Naomi looked directly at him. "Because corrupted deputies protect evidence before they protect themselves." That answer hit Mercer hard because he realized she was right. Grady grabbed his flashlight and motioned toward the hallway. "Let us move." The three of them stepped into the dim corridor under red emergency lights while thunder rolled overhead. Deputies moved nervously through the station lobby as the federal SUVs outside continued unloading agents in dark tactical jackets, marked with small gold lettering across their backs. The moment Naomi appeared in the hallway, several agents immediately recognized her. One woman with sharp brown eyes and rain dripping from her jacket stepped forward quickly. "Naomi." Relief flickered briefly across Naomi's face. "Agent Brooks." Mercer watched the exchange carefully. "No introductions. No hesitation." These people knew her well. Agent Elena Brooks looked toward Grady and Mercer with controlled urgency. "We have intercepted multiple outgoing calls from inside this building within the last 20 minutes. Grady's face hardened instantly. "Keller." Naomi was already moving down the hallway before anyone finished speaking. Mercer followed close behind while emergency lights painted the walls in shifting red shadows. The evidence corridor sat near the rear records room beside the station garage entrance. Quiet. Too quiet. Naomi slowed her pace immediately. "Stop," she whispered. Everyone froze. Rain echoed faintly through the metal garage doors nearby. Naomi listened carefully for several seconds before stepping forward again. Mercer noticed how differently she moved now. Every glance measured. Every breath controlled. This was not the exhausted truck driver from the roadside anymore. This was somebody trained to survive dangerous rooms. The evidence locker door stood slightly open. Sheriff Grady swore softly under his breath. Naomi pushed the door wider. Inside, shelves lined with evidence bins stretched beneath flickering fluorescent lights. One cabinet drawer hung open. Empty. The marked atlas from Naomi's truck was no longer the only missing item. Several evidence bags connected to recent interstate trafficking arrests had disappeared too. Mercer felt cold settle into his stomach. "He is cleaning records," Naomi said quietly. Then suddenly a metallic sound echoed from deeper inside the garage area. Everybody turned instantly. Deputy Ryan Keller stood near the service exit with rain blowing through the partially open garage door behind him. His uniform was soaked. One hand gripped a duffel bag stuffed with files and evidence envelopes. The other held a phone still glowing from a recent call. Keller looked directly at Naomi first. Not Mercer. Not Grady. Naomi. Fear crossed his face immediately. "You were supposed to disappear tonight," he whispered. Naomi stepped forward slowly beneath the flickering light. "And you were supposed to protect people." Keller's eyes darted toward the federal agents moving through the hallway behind them. Panic cracked through his expression. "You do not understand what these people do." Naomi's voice remained painfully calm. No, Ryan. I understand exactly what they do. Rain blew through the partially open garage door in cold sheets while Deputy Ryan Keller stood frozen beneath the flickering fluorescent lights. The duffel bag hanging from his hand sagged with stolen evidence files and sealed envelopes marked from interstate investigations. Naomi Carter faced him calmly from the center of the garage corridor, while federal agents slowly spread out behind her. Nobody rushed forward. Nobody shouted. Somehow the quiet made Keller look even more terrified. Ryan, Sheriff Grady said heavily, tell me this is not what it looks like. Keller laughed once under his breath, but it sounded broken. You think this started with me? His eyes darted toward Naomi again. She was supposed to stay invisible. Just another truck driver nobody cared about. Mercer felt those words hit harder than they should have. Naomi remained perfectly still. That was the point, she said softly. Keller tightened his grip on the bag. Do you know how easy it is? He snapped suddenly. Nobody questions trucks. Nobody remembers black women working overnight routes. Half the country looks right through them. The garage fell silent except for rain hammering the metal roof overhead. Mercer looked toward Naomi instinctively. She did not react outwardly, but something painful moved briefly behind her eyes. Keller saw it too. You used that, he said quietly. You let people underestimate you. Naomi stepped forward one slow step beneath the flickering light. No, she replied. People chose to underestimate me all by themselves. The words landed like a weight inside Mercer's chest. He remembered the roadside stop again. The jokes. The suspicion. The certainty in his own voice when he called her dangerous. Naomi had never needed to trick them into seeing less than she was. They had done that willingly. Keller shook his head weakly. You do not understand who Bishop really is. Agent Elena Brooks stepped forward now, rainwater dripping from her dark jacket onto the concrete floor. Actually, she said calmly, we understand him very well. Keller's breathing quickened. No, you do not. There are judges involved. Dispatchers. Port authorities. Half the people wearing badges around here answer to somebody higher. Grady looked physically ill hearing it spoken aloud. Naomi studied Keller quietly. How many girls cross through your route? Keller looked away immediately. That silence answered enough. Mercer clenched his jaw hard. Naomi noticed. Do not, she said softly to him. Mercer frowned. Do not what? Naomi's eyes stayed on Keller. Turn anger into an excuse to stop seeing people clearly. Mercer stared at her in disbelief. After everything tonight, you are worried about him? Naomi finally looked toward him. The red emergency lights reflected softly across her tired face. I am worried about what hate does to decent people when they stop questioning themselves. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Even Keller seemed stunned by her answer. Then the station intercom crackled alive again somewhere deeper inside the building. Bishop's voice remained smooth and terrifyingly calm. Ryan, he said softly, leave now. Keller's face drained of color instantly. Naomi, step closer. He will abandon you the second you walk outside. Keller swallowed hard. Rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the garage door behind him while thunder rolled low over the county. You do not know what he is capable of, Keller whispered. Naomi's expression softened unexpectedly. Ryan, she said quietly, I spent 6 years listening to mothers identify daughters from photographs. Keller's eyes lowered. Naomi continued carefully. Fear keeps men loyal to monsters longer than greed ever does. The garage lights flickered again. Somewhere beyond the station walls, sirens echoed faintly in the distance now. More units arriving. More federal teams. Bishop's network was closing. Keller slowly looked toward the duffel bag in his hand like he finally understood how small he truly was inside the machine he helped feed. Naomi stepped forward one final time and gently held out her hand toward him. You can still stop helping them tonight. Keller stared at her hand for several long seconds. Then slowly, almost trembling, he let the bag fall onto the concrete floor. Dawn arrived slowly over the county like a tired apology. The storm had finally passed, leaving the sheriff's station soaked in pale blue morning light and puddles that reflected the fading flash of federal vehicles parked outside. Inside the garage corridor, the smell of rainwater, Coffee and old concrete hung quietly in the air while agents moved evidence boxes toward waiting SUVs. Deputy Ryan Keller sat against the far wall wrapped in a gray blanket, staring blankly at the floor as federal investigators spoke softly nearby. Sheriff Grady looked older than he had the night before. Officer Mercer stood alone near the open garage door watching the sunrise bleed across the empty highway beyond town. Naomi Carter walked toward her truck slowly, one hand resting against the worn leather strap of her bag. The 18-wheeler sat exactly where deputies had left it hours earlier, rainwater still clinging to the chrome mirrors and long white trailer. Agent Elena Brooks stepped beside her holding a steaming paper cup. "You should sleep," she said quietly. Naomi accepted the coffee with tired fingers. "After paperwork." Brooks almost smiled. "You have been saying that for 6 years." Naomi looked out toward the interstate. Endless asphalt disappearing beneath morning fog. "And there are still girls missing." The words carried no drama, just exhaustion. Brooks studied her carefully for a moment before speaking again. "Bishop is gone, but Keller gave us names, dispatch logs, port records. We finally have enough to break the routes apart." Naomi nodded faintly, though her eyes remained distant. Victory did not seem to reach her the way Mercer expected it would. Maybe because this was not really victory. Not completely. Not after years of photographs and grieving families and children disappearing between state lines while people looked away. Mercer approached slowly across the wet pavement, boots splashing through shallow rainwater. Naomi turned toward him calmly. For a second neither spoke. Morning sunlight touched the side of her truck, warming the white paint gold beneath the fading storm clouds. Mercer finally cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." Naomi said nothing. Mercer looked down briefly before continuing. "Last night I saw a stereotype before I saw a person." The admission sounded painful leaving his mouth. "Honest to." Naomi studied him quietly while wind moved softly through the truck stop trees nearby. "Most people do," she said gently. Mercer nodded once like he deserved the answer. "Still does not make it right." Naomi took a small sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle against the cold exhaustion in her chest. "No," she agreed softly. "It does not." Another silence followed, but this one felt different from the others. Not hostile. Human. Mercer glanced toward the truck. "So what happens now?" Naomi looked toward the highway stretching east beneath the pale morning sky. "I keep driving." Mercer almost smiled at that. "You ever stop?" Naomi's expression softened just slightly. "Not while somebody out there still thinks nobody is looking for them." The words stayed with Mercer long after she said them. Agent Brooks handed Naomi a folder thick with reports before heading back toward the SUVs. Federal agents loaded the final evidence crates while Sheriff Grady quietly spoke with investigators near the station entrance. Somewhere in the distance, birds finally began singing after the storm. Naomi climbed into the cab of her truck slowly, pausing once before closing the door. Mercer stood below the driver's side window looking smaller somehow than he had the night before. Less certain. More aware. Naomi rolled the window down halfway. Mercer hesitated before speaking one final time. "You know," he said quietly, "when I first saw you out there on the highway I thought you were hiding something." Naomi rested one arm against the window frame while sunlight caught the scar near her jawline. "I was," she replied softly. Mercer frowned slightly. Naomi looked out toward the open road ahead. "I was hiding how tired I am of proving I belong in rooms people never expected me to survive." The engine rumbled to life beneath her hands. Mercer stepped back slowly as the 18-wheeler pulled away from the sheriff's station and rolled toward the interstate under the pale gold light of morning. Naomi did not look back again. She just kept driving east while the sunrise spread across the highway in long silent ribbons of light.